I should have left the moment I noticed the room had gone quiet. Not the natural quiet of a gala winding down. The other kind. The kind that settles over a crowd like a held breath. Collective and involuntary. The way birds stop singing before a storm arrives. I noticed it first in the posture of the waitstaff nearest the entrance. Spines straightening, eyes dropping, trays suddenly gripped with both hands instead of one. Then I noticed it in the guests. The way conversations tapered mid-sentence. The way men in expensive suits shifted their weight almost imperceptibly toward their wives or toward the nearest wall. I was balancing a tray of champagne flutes and pretending I hadn't noticed any of it. That was the job. See everything. React to nothing. Move like you're part of the furniture. Hargrove and Associates held their annual charity gala on the 14th floor of the Meridian Hotel every November. And for the third year running, I was part of the catering crew Deluxe Event Services sent to work it. The money was decent enough to ignore the fact that my feet would feel like bruised fruit by midnight, and the overtime helped cover the gap my regular hospital admin job left in my rent. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. At being invisible, at reading a room, at moving through crowds of wealthy, oblivious people without disturbing the surface of their world. I adjusted the tray against my palm and continued my circuit along the eastern edge of the ballroom. The decor this year was all ivory and gold, draped fabric overhead, candlelight from crystal fixtures that probably cost more than my monthly salary, waitstaff in black with white gloves, guests in gowns and tailored suits worth fortunes. Somewhere near the stage, a string quartet played something I vaguely recognized, low and elegant beneath the ambient hum of manufactured pleasantries. I was 3 steps past the bar station when I saw him. Or rather, I saw the space he occupied before I fully registered him. It was the way people moved around him. Not with the casual navigation of a crowded room, but with deliberate, almost rehearsed deference, parting without being asked, rerouting without acknowledgement, as if proximity itself carried a cost. 2 men flanked him at a precise distance, broad-shouldered and still-eyed, their attention sweeping the room in rotating patterns while their employer appeared entirely unconcerned with the world around him. He was young. That caught me off guard first. I'd half expected the usual profile, silver-haired, thick-necked, the kind of man whose power lived in his bulk and years. He was none of that. Mid to late 20s at most, with a face that belonged on the cover of something, all sharp angles and deliberate calm. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, with the kind of effortless precision that suggested someone else had arranged it. A black suit, perfectly fitted, nothing ostentatious about it except the quality you could identify from across a room, the way it moved with him rather than hanging on him. His shirt collar sat open at the throat, and in that gap, I caught the edge of ink, dark and intricate, crawling up from beneath the fabric toward his jaw. He wasn't scanning the room the way his guards were. He was simply present in it, still and composed, as though the entire gala had arranged itself around him without his input, and he found this neither surprising nor interesting. One hand held a glass of something amber. The other rested at his side. I pulled my attention away. Not your business. Keep moving. I completed my circuit, deposited the emptied tray at the service station behind the bar, and collected a fresh one. This time, small plates of something the chef had called amuse-bouche, which was a polished way of describing 6 bites arranged on slate. I moved back into the room. For the next 40 minutes, I existed only as function. Offer the plate, smile at the right distance, step back, move on. The gala had a rhythm, and I'd learned to match it, learned to feel when a cluster of guests was about to disperse, when someone's glass was about to need replacing, when the invisible current of the room shifted toward the stage for a speech or an announcement. I was navigating between 2 clusters of guests near the center of the room when the current shifted unexpectedly. A woman, mid-40s, sharp blonde updo, the particular brittle poise of someone 3 glasses of wine into performing effortlessness, turned abruptly from her conversation. Her elbow caught my tray. The correction I made was purely reflexive. I twisted my wrist to stabilize, absorbed the impact through my forearm, kept every plate level. Nothing fell, nothing shattered. A clean recovery, invisible to most of the room. But the momentum carried me backward half a step, and that half step was all it took. I collided with something solid and unyielding at my back. Not a pillar, not a table, a person. I heard the quiet sound of liquid meeting fabric before I fully processed what had happened. Before I turned and found myself looking at a white dress shirt, now marked with a spreading dark stain where the glass he'd been holding had tilted on impact. The amber liquid. His glass. The world contracted. My tray was still in my hands. Every plate still level, absurdly, uselessly intact. I had saved everyone else's champagne and upended a drink on a man whose guards were already stepping forward, whose presence had silenced a room full of powerful people simply by entering it. I turned fully to face him, and immediately wished I hadn't. Up close, he was more disorienting than at a distance. The angles of his face were sharper, his eyes darker, a deep and unreadable brown that caught the candlelight without warming. The tattoo at his throat was intricate. A dense, detailed pattern of shapes I couldn't fully decipher in the moment, ink that disappeared into his collar and reappeared along the underside of his jaw. He smelled faintly of cedar and something colder underneath, like clean stone after rain. He was looking at me, not at the stain on his shirt, not at the tray in my hands. At me, with an expression so composed it took me a disoriented moment to understand he wasn't angry. Or if he was, it lived somewhere beneath the stillness, contained with a precision that was its own kind of warning. One of his guards had materialized at my shoulder. I felt him before I saw him. "I'm so sorry." My voice came out steadier than I deserved. "I'm the woman behind me." I stopped, because the explanation felt like an excuse, and something about the way he was watching me made excuses feel inadequate. "I'm sorry. Let me find someone from management. They'll handle the... What's your name?" His voice was low, unhurried, lightly accented in a way that shaped the words with unusual precision, as though language was something he handled carefully. I blinked. "Charlotte." He held my gaze for a moment that lasted several seconds longer than it had any right to. Then his attention moved, briefly, deliberately, to a point just past my left shoulder. I didn't need to look to understand that whatever signal passed between him and his guard, it was not a small one. "Charlotte." He said my name the way people repeat something they're cataloging. "Don't go far." Before I could process what that meant, a man in a charcoal suit was at his side. Not a guard, someone else. Someone who'd emerged from the cluster of guests with the quiet speed of a person accustomed to being summoned. He murmured something close to his employer's ear. The change was nearly imperceptible, a fractional tightening around the eyes. The glass, half empty now, set down on the nearest surface with careful quiet. He turned away from me without another word. I stood there for 3 full seconds, tray in both hands, plates undisturbed, heart hammering against my ribs with a violence I couldn't explain, because he hadn't threatened me, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything except say my name. Don't go far. The string quartet was still playing. The room had resumed its movement, conversation reconstituting itself around the disruption, as though it had never occurred. The blonde woman who'd started all of this had already drifted back to her circle, oblivious. I turned toward the service corridor. A hand closed around my wrist, not tight, not rough, but absolute, and I went still. It was the guard. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes remained on the room, scanning with the patience of someone paid never to stop. "Mr. Shin would like you to wait," he said quietly. "By the east corridor. Not long." I looked at my wrist, then at the guard's profile. "I have a job to do," I said. He said nothing. His grip didn't shift. And in the silence that followed, in the warm, golden, deceptively beautiful air of that ballroom, I understood for the first time that the word wait had not been a request. He kept me waiting for 11 minutes. I know because I counted them, not from impatience, but because counting gave my hands something to do besides tremble. The east corridor was a narrow service passage between the ballroom and the hotel's private dining rooms, lit by recessed fixtures that hummed faintly overhead. A folded linen cart stood against one wall. The distant percussion of the kitchen reached me in waves, metal against metal, voices calling in shorthand, the controlled chaos of people performing precision under pressure. I understood that world. I did not understand this one. The guard who'd stopped me had positioned himself at the corridor's entrance, back to me, arms loose at his sides. He hadn't spoken again. Hadn't needed to. His presence alone communicated the full scope of my options, which amounted to one: stay. So I stayed. I set my tray on the linen cart and pressed my back against the cool wall and breathed through the particular kind of fear that doesn't announce itself loudly. The quiet kind. The kind that settles in your chest like cold water and makes everything feel slightly unreal. Don't go far. I turned the words over again. They hadn't been menacing exactly. They'd been stated, the way someone states a fact about the weather or a figure in a contract, with the calm assurance that the world will arrange itself accordingly. That certainty was, somehow, worse than volume would have been. I heard him before I saw him. Not his footsteps. Those were nearly silent, controlled. But the shift in the guard's posture at the corridor entrance. A subtle squaring of the shoulders, a slight lift of the chin. Deference expressed in muscle memory. Kyung-soo stepped into the corridor. He'd changed his shirt. Somewhere in the span of 11 minutes, a fresh white shirt had replaced the stained one. His jacket resettled across his shoulders with the same architectural precision as before. The only evidence that anything had occurred at all was the faint scent of cedar and something sharper, a hint of whatever product kept his hair in its swept position, that arrived with him into the narrow space. He stopped a few feet away. In the reduced scale of the corridor, with the ballroom noise muffled behind the walls and the two of us occupying a space designed for invisibility, he seemed different, not softer. Nothing about him suggested softness, but more defined somehow. The candlelight of the ballroom had lent him a certain abstraction. Here, the recessed lighting was clinical and honest, and still his face held that quality of careful composure, like something sculpted specifically to give nothing away. He looked at me the same way he had in the ballroom, unhurried, assessing. "You're not going to apologize again," he said. It wasn't a question. "I already apologized," I said. Twice, actually. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, brief and controlled. "I'm not here about the shirt, Charlotte." My name in his mouth again. That same deliberate quality, like he was deciding each time that I was worth the precision. "Then what are you here about?" I asked, because the alternative was standing in silence while my heartbeat staged a private disaster against my ribs, and I had enough dignity left to resist that. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket, a movement so unhurried it seemed almost lazy, and produced a phone. He turned the screen toward me. A photograph. A woman, perhaps my age, dark-haired, photographed at what appeared to be a garden party or outdoor event. She was laughing at someone off camera, relaxed and unguarded in the way people only are when they don't know they're being watched. I looked up from the screen. "Who is she?" "Her name doesn't matter." He returned the phone to his pocket with the same unhurried economy. "What matters is that the man she's standing beside in the original photograph is someone I have a meeting with in 4 days. A man who makes certain assumptions about the kind of people he conducts business with. Family men. Men with roots. With something to lose." He paused. "He knew someone who looked very much like you once. Someone important to him." I absorbed this. "That's why you stopped me," I said slowly. "Not because of the shirt." The shirt was coincidence. His eyes hadn't left mine. "You, I would have found another way." The cold water in my chest spread a little further. "I don't understand what you want from me," I said, though some part of me, the part that had been reading rooms and people for years out of pure necessity, already understood the shape of it. I needed him to say it plainly, because I needed to be certain I wasn't constructing this. 4 days, he said. A dinner. A private event at a venue outside the city. You attend as my companion. You behave naturally. There's nothing to memorize, no script. You speak when spoken to, stay close, and leave the conversation to me. A brief pause. Pretend to be my girlfriend. The words landed in the corridor's quiet, with a weight entirely disproportionate to their syllables. I laughed. A short, involuntary sound. Not from amusement, but from the sheer unreality of the moment. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? Yes. Because I look like someone this man used to know. Resemblance is a tool. I use what's available. I studied his face for something. Calculation, condescension, the particular gleam of a man accustomed to purchasing whatever he needed without friction. I found only that same composed attention, patient in the way that things with absolute confidence in the outcome are always patient. And if I say no, I asked, you won't. The certainty of it moved through me like a current. You don't know that. Charlotte. He said my name differently this time. Quieter, with something beneath the composure that I couldn't categorize. You work 2 jobs. You're here at 11 on a Thursday wearing shoes that stopped fitting correctly an hour ago, and you haven't eaten since your break at 6. He paused. I'm not insulting you. I'm telling you that I pay attention, and that what I'm offering is significant. I hadn't told him any of that, which meant he'd learned it in the 11 minutes I'd spent waiting in this corridor, and the understanding of that, the speed and ease of it, sent a chill across the back of my neck that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How much? I asked, because my pride had limits and my bank account had none. He told me. The number was clean and specific, the way numbers are when they've been calculated in advance of the conversation. Not a negotiating position, a statement. Enough to cover 2 months of rent and the medical bill I'd been paying down in increments since last spring. Enough to matter. One condition, he added. I waited. While we are seen together, at the dinner, in transit, anywhere our paths cross in those 4 days, you do not pull away from me. No hesitation, no visible discomfort. Whatever I do in the presence of others, you respond as though it is natural, as though you belong beside me. The air in the corridor felt closer. Whatever you do, I repeated carefully. I don't require performances. The word performances carried a slight edge. Distaste, I thought, which surprised me. I require believability. There's a difference. His gaze dropped, briefly, just a fraction, to my hands, where I was apparently gripping the edge of the linen cart hard enough to leave impressions in my palm. His expression registered this and returned to neutral before I could name what I'd seen in it. You're not in danger, Charlotte. Not from me. Not from me. The qualifier was doing considerable work. And the condition is non-negotiable, I said. All my conditions are. I looked at him, at the ink climbing his throat, the dark eyes that gave nothing away, the absolute stillness of a man who had long ago stopped needing the world to move at his pace, because it simply did. I thought about my bank account, my shoes, the medical bill, the particular exhaustion of a life held together with careful budgeting and 12-hour shifts. I thought about the word believability and what 4 days beside this man would actually require of my body, my face, the involuntary spaces where composure lived. I'll need the details in writing, I said finally. Time, location, duration, and the money transferred before the event, not after. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, but a recalibration, subtle and fast, as though he'd run a model and the output had differed slightly from his projection. Done, he said. He produced a card from his jacket pocket and extended it toward me. Heavy stock, no logo, only a number printed in clean dark ink. When I reached for it, his fingers didn't immediately release it. Charlotte. The quiet again. That lower register. I should tell you one more thing. I kept my hand on the card. What? His eyes held mine, steady and unreadable as ever. And then, for just a moment, beneath all that careful composure, I caught something else. Something that didn't have a clean name. Something that looked almost like it had been there since the moment his guard first closed a hand around my wrist. The condition isn't negotiable, he said. But it isn't only for the dinner. I didn't get the chance to ask what he meant. His guard appeared at the corridor entrance, murmured something in Korean, low and clipped. Kyung-soo released the card, turned, and walked back toward the ballroom without another word, as though the conversation had reached its natural end, and the rest was simply paperwork. I stood in the service corridor with his card in my hand, the hum of the overhead lights filling the silence he'd left behind, and tried to understand what, exactly, I had just agreed to. The card sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days. I didn't touch it after the first night. I'd come home from the gala with sore feet and a restless mind, set it on the counter beside my keys, and then proceeded to cook dinner, shower, grade the stack of insurance forms I'd brought home from work, and go to bed, all while being entirely, exhaustingly aware of it in my peripheral vision. A small rectangle of heavy cream stock with 11 digits printed on it in clean dark ink. Unremarkable by every objective measure. I woke up Saturday still thinking about it. By Sunday afternoon, I'd talked myself out of calling 4 separate times using 4 separate arguments. It was reckless. It was naive. Men like that didn't offer clean transactions. And the one I returned to most often, turning it over like a stone with something uncomfortable underneath. I didn't know what the condition isn't only for the dinner actually meant, and I hadn't asked. That last part was the problem. I should have asked. The fact that I hadn't asked told me something about myself that I wasn't entirely prepared to examine. I called the number on Sunday evening, standing at my kitchen counter with my second cup of coffee going cold beside me. He answered on the second ring. I have questions, I said, without preamble. I expected them sooner. No greeting, no surprise in his voice. Only that same unhurried quality, as though he'd been waiting for this call in the same way one waits for weather that was already forecast. What did you mean? I said carefully. When you said the condition wasn't only for the dinner? A brief pause, not hesitation, something more deliberate. There are people who will see us at the dinner, he said, and people who will see us before it. My world is not a single room, Charlotte. It watches continuously. Another pause. For 4 days, you are beside me when I require it, not only at the table. I absorb this. That's a significant expansion of the original terms. The original terms were a summary. This is the complete version. You could have led with the complete version. You would have said no to the summary. The precision of that landed somewhere between irritating and unnerving. You don't know that, I said, which was exactly what I'd said in the corridor 2 nights ago, and which had been just as unconvincing then. Charlotte. Something in his voice shifted. Not warmer, exactly, but less formal. Stripped of one layer of that composed distance. Nothing will be asked of you that you haven't consented to in advance. I'll tell you what each situation requires. You retain the right to set limits. A pause. I keep my word. That's the only assurance I can offer you, but it's one I don't give lightly. I stood in my kitchen in the Sunday evening quiet and thought about the 11 minutes in the service corridor, the speed with which he'd learned the outline of my finances, the card extended between his fingers with that fractional delay before he released it. I want the money transferred before Wednesday, I said. Not the day of. Tomorrow morning. I closed my eyes briefly. All right. A car will come for you Wednesday at 6. Pack for 2 nights. A pause. And Charlotte, when the driver gives you his name, it will be Min. That's how you'll know he's mine. The call ended. I set my phone down on the counter beside the cold coffee and stood very still in my kitchen for a long moment, listening to the particular silence of a decision already made. The car arrived Wednesday at 5:58. Min was a compact man in his 40s with close-cropped hair, and the patient, watchful eyes of someone who spent most of his professional life observing without being observed. He confirmed his name without being asked, a single word, offered at the exact moment I opened my building's front door, as though he'd timed it, and took my bag before I could protest. The vehicle was a dark sedan with tinted windows, immaculate interior, the faint smell of leather, and a something else I couldn't identify. Not quite cologne, not quite cedar, but close to both. I sat in the back and watched the city dissolve into highway through glass that muffled all external sound to a low hum. Kyung-soo was already inside when Min pulled into the private entrance of a hotel I didn't recognize, 40 minutes outside the city, its facade understated in the way that serious money always is, preferring restraint to display. The lobby was all dark wood and indirect lighting, staff who moved with the specific efficiency of people trained to anticipate rather than react. He was waiting near the entrance to the private elevator, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a phone he was looking at without expression. 2 guards flanked him at their customary distance. He looked up when I approached, not with the searching quality of someone checking whether an arrangement had held, but with something quieter, more direct, as though my arrival confirmed something he'd already settled in his mind. "You came," he said. I said I would. He studied my face for a moment. Then, without further comment, he extended his hand. The gesture was simple, understated. His palm open at the space between us, waiting, with the same patient certainty he applied to everything. No urgency, no pressure, just the offer held steady in the air. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine with a warmth I hadn't anticipated. Not possessive, not performative, just present. Firm enough to be unambiguous. He turned toward the elevator without releasing my hand, and I fell into step beside him, and the guards adjusted their formation around us with the silent precision of people who had done this many times before. In the elevator, the doors closed, and the quiet was absolute. I became acutely aware of his hand, the way his thumb had settled at the inside of my wrist, not moving, simply resting there, over the place where my pulse lived. Whether he could feel it, I didn't know. Whether he was paying attention, I couldn't tell from his profile, which gave nothing away as he watched the floor numbers ascend. "The dinner is tomorrow evening," he said. "Tonight is preparation. There's someone you'll need to meet, a woman named Ji-yeon. She manages logistics for my household. She'll brief you on Park Seo-jun, who you'll be meeting tomorrow, and on what he needs to believe about us." "What does he need to believe?" "That you've been beside me for months, that you know me." He paused. "Not the version of me he expects, the version he hopes to find. A man who has chosen someone, who has perhaps softened slightly at the edges." Something in his voice when he said this was careful in a new way, deliberate but also contained, like a door held mostly closed. Park responds to what he perceives as vulnerability in others. He trusts men who have something to protect. "And I'm what you're protecting." He turned his head and looked at me directly. A full, unguarded look that lasted only a second, but felt longer. "For the purposes of tomorrow, yes," he said. The elevator opened onto a private floor. The suite was substantial. Dark furnishings, floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling geometry of the city visible in the distance. Ji-yeon was already there. A small, precise woman in her 30s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a tablet in her hands, who assessed me with a single pass of her eyes, and then offered a crisp, professional nod. The briefing took 2 hours. I learned that Park Seo-jun was 63, the head of a family that ran legitimate import operations as cover for considerably less legitimate ones, that he had lost a daughter 8 years ago and carried the grief of it like a wound that hadn't closed, and that the woman in the photograph on Kyung-soo's phone, the laughing woman at the garden party, had been that daughter's closest friend. I learned that my resemblance to her was apparently significant enough that Park's own people had flagged it in a report. I learned that the deal Kyung-soo needed Park to agree to was worth more than I could comfortably conceptualize, and that Park had refused 2 previous meetings on the grounds that he didn't conduct business with men he didn't trust. And I learned, somewhere in the second hour, that Ji-yeon watched Kyung-soo when she thought he wasn't looking, with an expression that was professional on the surface and something else entirely underneath. Not affection, not exactly. The particular regard of someone who has observed a person long enough to know things about them that the person hasn't chosen to share. When she left, Kyung-soo walked her to the suite's entry, and they exchanged a few words in Korean, low and brief. I moved to the window and looked out at the city and tried to organize what I'd learned into something manageable. I heard him return. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" I turned from the window. He'd removed his jacket, and in the suite's quieter light, the tattoo at his throat was more visible, the ink detailed and deliberate, climbing from beneath his collar to curve along his jaw. He looked younger without the jacket, which was strange, because nothing else about him suggested youth. "About the woman in the photograph," I said. "About what it means that I look like someone Park Seo-jin grieves." He was quiet for a moment. "It means tomorrow is important." "It means tomorrow I'll be standing in front of a man who sees a ghost when he looks at me," I said. "That's not a small thing to ask someone to do." Something moved through his expression, a brief disruption of the composure, there and gone. He crossed the room in a few unhurried steps and stopped in front of me, closer than the briefing's professional distance had required, close enough that I could smell the cedar and cold stone scent that I was beginning to recognize as distinctly his. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." His hand came up, slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back, and his fingertips rested against my jaw, barely touching. A contact so light it was more warmth than pressure, the way you might steady something fragile without gripping it. "You don't have to become her," he said. "You only have to be yourself beside me." His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, once, and then stilled. "That's enough." I stood very still beneath his hand, and tried to remember every reason I'd told myself this was a transaction. The city glittered beyond the window. His touch didn't move. And in the hushed interior of a suite, paid for by money I had no framework to imagine, I understood with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that whatever was happening in this room bore very little resemblance to a business arrangement. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He read the message without stepping back, his hand dropping naturally from my face. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow requires you present." He moved to the far side of the suite with the same controlled quiet he carried everywhere, and I stood at the window a moment longer, my cheek still warm where his hand had been, looking out at the city lights and trying very hard not to think about what his thumb tracing my cheekbone had actually felt like. I failed entirely to stop thinking about it. I didn't sleep well. The suite's guest room was impeccable. Soft linens, a mattress that cost more than my monthly rent, blackout curtains that turned the room into complete, seamless dark. None of it helped. I lay on my back and stared at a ceiling I couldn't see, and listened to the building's quiet, which was the particular quality of quiet that expensive places manufacture. The absence of ordinary life, all its friction and noise insulated away, leaving something that felt less like peace and more like suspension. At some point past 2 a.m, I heard movement in the suite's main room. Soft, unhurried, the low sound of a drawer, a pause, then silence again. I lay still and told myself it was nothing and believed none of it. I thought about his thumb on my cheekbone. I thought about the way he'd said that's enough, not as a consolation, but as a genuine assessment. The way someone states a fact they've considered and arrived at independently of any need to reassure. I thought about Ji-yeon's expression and the things it had contained, and I wondered how long she had known him, and what the shape of his life actually looked like from the inside. By 6, I gave up on sleep and showered and dressed in the clothes Ji-yeon had arranged, a deep burgundy dress, understated but precise, with a hemline that fell below the knee and a neckline that suggested without displaying, heels that fit correctly, a thin gold chain at my throat. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I recognized the intention behind the choices. I looked like someone who belonged in the rooms we'd be moving through. Someone settled, certain of her place. I looked nothing like myself, and exactly like the version of me this evening required. Kyung-soo was already at the suite's dining table when I came out, a cup of coffee in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other, 2 guards visible near the entry. He looked up when I appeared. The assessment was brief and, I thought, involuntary. His eyes moved over me once, from the hem of the dress to my face, and then returned to my face and stayed there. Something in his expression was very controlled. "Coffee," he said, which was not a question, but also somehow an offering, and I sat across from him and accepted the cup that appeared at my elbow from somewhere and held it with both hands and tried to feel like myself. "Tell me something true about you," he said, without looking up from the newspaper. I blinked. "I'm sorry. Park will ask questions, not the ones Ji-yeon prepared you for. The peripheral ones. The ones people ask when they're actually trying to understand someone." He turned a page. "If your answers don't have texture, he'll notice." I considered this. I grew up in Baltimore. My mother taught 3rd grade for 22 years and had very specific opinions about the correct way to make rice. I wanted to be a doctor until I was 19. Then I ran out of money and adjusted my expectations. I paused. I have a scar on my left knee from a bicycle accident when I was 8, and I've never been able to explain it without making it sound worse than it was. He lowered the newspaper. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Something open in it, briefly, like a window operated from the inside. "What happened with the bicycle?" he asked. I was trying to ride with no hands and show off for a boy in my neighborhood who was absolutely not paying attention to me. I felt the corners of my mouth move. The concrete paid a great deal of attention to me, however. Something happened to his face, not the controlled near smile from the gala. Something warmer, less managed, there for a second and then carefully gathered back. He looked down at his coffee. "Park will like you," he said. "Is that good?" He was quiet for a moment. "For the purposes of the meeting, yes." I noticed the qualifier. I didn't comment on it. The venue was a private estate 40 minutes further outside the city, a property that announced nothing from the road. Its entrance a simple gate between trees that opened without ceremony onto a long drive. The house itself was substantial and old, the kind of old that accumulates without trying to. Stone and timber and the specific atmosphere of a building that has held generations of complicated history. Min drove. Kyung-soo sat beside me in the back, not touching, but close. The kind of proximity that becomes its own statement in a narrow space. He'd given me a single instruction before we departed. Follow my lead, and trust that I will tell you before I need anything from you. I had, somewhat to my own surprise, found this reassuring. Park Seo-jun met us in the entrance hall. He was shorter than I'd imagined from the briefing, compact, precise, with white at his temples, and the kind of deliberate stillness that I was beginning to recognize as the particular posture of powerful men who had long ago stopped needing to perform their authority. He wore a dark suit and no tie, and he carried his age with the ease of someone who had decided somewhere along the way that it was simply a fact rather than a verdict. When his eyes found me, he went very still. Not dramatically, not with visible shock or distress, but there was a pause, a single beat where the composed surface of his expression fractured slightly, and something raw and old moved beneath it, and then he closed it back up with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent decades managing himself in front of people who were always watching. "Kyung-soo," he said. His voice was warm in a careful way. "Park Si." Kyung-soo inclined his head with a respect that was genuine. I could tell the difference by now, I realized. The performed kind was smoother. Thank you for having us. Park's gaze moved back to me. And this is Charlotte, Kyung-soo said. His hand came to the small of my back, his palm warm through the fabric of the dress, settled there with a natural ease that made my breath adjust without permission. She's been beside me for some time now. Park studied my face. I held his gaze and offered a small, genuine smile, the kind that didn't require practice because it came from a real place. The place that understood. Looking at this man, that he was carrying grief, and that being looked at the way he was looking at me probably hurt in ways he hadn't anticipated today. It's a pleasure to meet you, I said. He was quiet for one more beat. Then something in him settled, not relaxed, but decided. Come in, he said. Both of you. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Park had people of his own at the table, 2 men I didn't know, a woman introduced as his legal advisor, and a younger man, perhaps 30, who watched Kyung-soo with the precise attention of someone cataloging a threat. I filed that away. The conversation moved in the elegant, indirect way of people who had important things to discuss and were in no hurry to approach them directly. I spoke when addressed, which happened more often than I'd expected. Park drew me in with the specific attentiveness of a man who had decided he was interested, asking about Baltimore, about my work, about how Kyung-soo and I had met. I gave him versions of the truth that were close enough to be textured, the way Kyung-soo had asked for. At one point, during a lull while the table was being cleared between courses, Park leaned slightly toward me and said, quietly enough that it was meant only for me, "You have a very particular quality of presence. A steadiness." He paused. Someone important to me had that same quality. I met his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. Not because the briefing had prepared me to say it, but because it was true, and it was all there was to say. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and the moment passed. Kyung-soo's hand found mine beneath the table during the final course, not visibly, not for the room. Just his fingers closing around mine in the space between our chairs, steady and warm, and staying there. I didn't look at him. He didn't look at me. But his thumb moved once across my knuckles, slow, deliberate, and I understood that it was not for Park's benefit, because Park couldn't see it. It was for no audience at all. The business was settled over the final glass of wine. Park agreed to the terms, not with ceremony, but with a single quiet statement directed at Kyung-soo, and the particular exhale of a man who had made a decision he'd been holding back and found the release of it easier than expected. Hands were shaken. Arrangements were made for formal documentation. We were in the car by 10:30. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Min drove. The city's distant glow, a pale warmth on the horizon, and the sedan's interior held us in its quiet like something gathered. "You told him the truth," Kyung-soo said. "About Baltimore. About your mother." "You said texture," I said. "Truth has more texture than invention." He was quiet. "He'll sign everything," he said eventually. Not triumphantly, as a fact. Whatever hesitation remained, you resolved it. "You resolved it," I said. "I was furniture." "Charlotte." His voice was very quiet. "You were not furniture." I looked at him then. In the car's low ambient light, his profile was sharp and still, his hands resting open on his thighs, an unguarded posture I hadn't seen from him before. He was looking straight ahead, but there was something in the set of his jaw that suggested the conversation had more weight for him than the words were carrying. "The condition," I said. "The one you said wasn't only for the dinner. What did you mean exactly?" A long pause. "I meant," he said slowly, "that the dinner was a reason I gave you. One that made practical sense and that you could accept." He turned his head and looked at me, and in his eyes, dark and steady as they always were, was something stripped of its usual containment. Something that had been there, I thought, since a service corridor and a stained white shirt. The reason beneath it is less practical. My chest tightened. Kyung-soo, you don't need to say anything, he said, not cutting me off, giving me room. I'm not asking for anything beyond what you've already given. I only wanted you to know that I was aware of the difference. He turned back to the window. Between what I told you and what was true. The car moved through the dark. His hand rested open on his thigh, 3 inches from mine. I thought about every careful boundary I'd drawn in the past 4 days, every internal argument about transactions and practicality, and the particular stupidity of feeling things about men whose world you didn't understand and couldn't enter. Then I reached across the space between us and placed my hand over his. He went very still. After a moment, his fingers turned beneath mine and closed, and neither of us said anything at all for the rest of the drive. We returned to the city the following morning. The drive back was different from every other transition of the past 4 days, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with silence, and everything to do with what had been said, and what hadn't, and the hand I'd placed over his in the dark of the car the night before. Min drove without looking at us. The morning light came through the tinted windows in diluted gray, and Kyung-soo sat beside me with his shoulder close to mine, not touching but near enough that I could feel the warmth of him. And I looked at the passing landscape and tried to understand what I was carrying home. He'd walked me to my suite door the previous night without ceremony, stood in the corridor for a moment, studying my face with that dark, unhurried attention, and then said, "Sleep well," Charlotte in a voice that was quieter than usual, stripped of its professional layer, and turned and walked away before I could construct a response. I'd stood in the doorway and watched him go, and felt something settle in my chest that I had no clean name for. Something that sat between gratitude and longing, and the particular ache of recognizing, too late, that you'd crossed a line you'd drawn for yourself without noticing the exact moment your feet left the ground. I slept that night, without difficulty. In the morning, he was at the table again. Coffee, the same composed posture. But when I came in, he looked up immediately, as though he'd been aware of the door before it opened. Something in the set of his shoulders was different. Still careful, but not distant. We ate breakfast without much conversation. Min loaded the bags. The estate fell away behind us. 40 minutes from the city, Kyung-soo said, "There's something I need to tell you." I turned from the window. "Park Seojin recognized you," he said. "Not from a resemblance. Personally." I went still. "That's not possible. I've never met him." "His daughter." A pause. "She wasn't only a friend of the woman in my photograph. She worked, briefly, at the same hospital network where you're employed. 3 years ago. Different building, different department." He looked at me steadily. "Park has known your name since yesterday morning. One of his people identified you before the dinner." The information rearranged itself inside me slowly, like furniture shifted in a dark room. "He knew," I said. "When he looked at me, he knew you weren't a ghost. He knew exactly who you were." Kyung-soo's voice was even, and he agreed to the terms anyway. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know what you actually walked into." Something moved through his expression. Not guilt, which would have been easier to categorize, but something more complex. The particular discomfort of a man confronting the distance between what he'd arranged and what had actually unfolded. "I told you the dinner required believability. I didn't tell you that Park had already decided, before you arrived, that he would make his decision based on you." "On me," I repeated. "On whether you were real." He held my gaze. "His daughter spoke of you. Apparently, in the months she worked near your department, you were kind to her in small ways. The kind of ways people don't remember performing, but that the recipient carries. She told her father about a woman at the hospital who always said good morning, who once sat with her in a break room when she was crying and didn't ask questions." He paused. Park has been watching Kyung-soo dealings for 2 years. He needed to know the kind of man I was before he trusted me with anything. And the woman his daughter described, he needed to see whether she was genuinely beside me or arranged. The morning light shifted as we passed beneath a stretch of overpass, and for a moment, the car was in shadow. So, the entire thing, I said carefully. The resemblance to the woman in the photograph, all of it. Was partly true, he said. The resemblance was real. It was the reason I noticed you. But the reason I stopped you in that corridor. A pause with real weight in it. Charlotte, I had a report on the hospital connection before the gala. I went to that event knowing you would be there. The cold water feeling returned, but different now. Not fear, something more complicated. You arranged it, I said. I created the conditions, he said. I didn't arrange your feelings or mine. I looked at him for a long moment, at the ink at his throat, the controlled face, the hands resting open and still on his thighs, the unguarded posture I'd only started seeing in the last 24 hours. You could have simply told me, I said. The actual reason. You would have said no. You keep deciding what I would have said. I keep being right, he said, and there was something in it that wasn't arrogance exactly. More like the exhausted honesty of a man who had run the calculation many times and arrived at the same answer and found no satisfaction in his own accuracy. Kyung-soo. I said his name, and he went slightly still, the way he always did when I used it. I'd noticed that, somewhere in the last 2 days, the way his composure adjusted fractionally around the sound of it from my mouth. Why does it matter? What I think of you. You have the deal. Park signed. The arrangement is finished. I held his gaze. Why tell me any of this? A long silence. Outside, the city was resolving itself from the gray morning, buildings accumulating, traffic thickening, the familiar geometry of ordinary life returning around the car's insulated quiet. Because I told you I keep my word, he said finally. And I told you I would tell you what each situation required before it happened. His voice was low and very steady. I failed that once. I'm correcting it now. Once, I said. Once, he confirmed. I don't intend to again. Min pulled to the curb outside my building. The city moved around us, people on the sidewalk, a delivery vehicle double parked, pigeons conducting their ordinary business on the steps. All of it indifferent to the interior of a dark sedan and the conversation happening inside it. I didn't move to open the door. The 4 days are finished, I said. Yes. The arrangement is concluded. Yes. I looked at him. Then what happens now is not an arrangement. Something in his face shifted, a slow, genuine opening, like a shutter drawn back from a window that had been closed a long time. His eyes, always so composed, held something warm and unguarded and almost careful with itself, as though it had been kept in the dark and wasn't certain yet how it would hold in the light. No, he said quietly. It isn't. I reached for the door handle, then I stopped. You should know something true about me, I said, since we're correcting things. He waited. That morning in the break room, with Park's daughter, I turned back to face him fully. I didn't sit with her because I was kind. I sat with her because she was crying, and I knew what it felt like to cry somewhere you weren't supposed to, and need someone to simply not leave. I held his gaze. I'm not the person Park described. I'm just a person who's been lonely enough, long enough, to recognize it in others. The silence that followed was the softest one we'd shared. Kyung-soo reached across the space between us and tucked a loose strand of hair back from my face. Slowly, with a gentleness so deliberate it felt like a kind of courage from a man for whom control was both armor and habit. His fingertips rested against my temple for a moment. I know, he said. That's why I stopped you in that corridor. I stepped out of the car into the ordinary morning air, my bag on my shoulder, the city resuming its indifferent noise around me. Before Min pulled the door closed, I turned once more. Kyung-soo was watching me with those dark, steady eyes, the composure intact, but something alive behind it now, visible in the way the morning light caught him. "Good morning, Charlotte," he said. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Real this time, unmanaged, belonging entirely to him. "Good morning," I said. The door closed. The car didn't pull away immediately. It sat at the curb while I climbed my steps and reached my door and found my keys. And when I turned at the top of the steps, it was still there, waiting, without explanation, until I was inside. I stood in my apartment with my bag at my feet, and the city noise returning through the walls, and the particular warmth of someone having waited to make sure I was safe, pressing against my chest, in a way I had no intention of dismissing. I was not the same person who had balanced a tray in that ballroom 4 days ago. That woman had been careful and contained and very practiced at being invisible. I understood her completely. I had been her for years. And I felt no grief at the distance now between us. On my kitchen counter, where his card had sat for 2 days, there was nothing. I didn't need it anymore. I had something better. The knowledge that he'd been honest, finally, at the cost of a clean exit. The understanding that a man who could have simply let the arrangement conclude had instead chosen to correct a single failure of transparency at the exact moment it no longer served him to do so. That was not the behavior of a transaction. 3 days later, he called. Not a text, not a message through Min. His voice, direct and unhurried, asking if I'd eaten dinner. I hadn't. "Then I'll come," he said. "Nothing arranged. Just dinner." I looked around my ordinary kitchen. The slightly uneven cabinet door. The plant on the windowsill that was doing its best. The single good knife I'd bought myself the year I decided I deserved at least one good thing. "Just dinner," I said. "Just dinner," he confirmed. And in the quiet that followed, in the space between his voice and mine, I heard the end of one thing and the beginning of something neither of us had planned. Chosen now with full knowledge of its weight, without the cover of arrangement or resemblance or careful conditions. Only 2 people at last, being nothing other than exactly what they were.